We're going to be opening up in Deuteronomy chapter 6. So if you want to go there. We've been studying worship the true nature, and we've brought up several things over the past 5 weeks when it comes to that. We talked about worshiping in majesty, and we bow down, and just other things like that. You know, we're studying about the true nature of the one true God. And that is God, the Creator. According to Genesis, God created everything, and everything is an expression of God's creative power, including humanity and us. God created all that exists. How was the earth prior to God's creation? It was formless and void, dark, empty. And then God speaks creation into existence by His Word. God makes humanity in His image, and male and female, He created them. And God immediately places humanity in the Garden of Eden where they can thrive and enjoy the beauty of God's creation. God even put the care of the garden with them. Peace on earth until Adam and Eve are expelled from the garden for disobedience to God. Deceived by the serpent, a distress of God was implanted by. That distress leads to disobedience and sin producing as a result of suffering and death. So at first there was harmony with God, and humanity depended on God in the garden where everything was provided with them. So one of the first things that jumps out is in Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall have the Lord your God you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your might. When he says, Hear, O Israel, has anybody ever paid attention to that particular start and see what that means? I find it interesting. Hear, O Israel. Anybody want to take a... Pay attention, right? Pay attention. Ray says pay attention. What else? I'm sorry? Listen, my people. Listen, my people, yeah. So where I came up with it was, part of it is not only pay attention, listen, my people, but how to do that, how to listen. How do you think we should listen? By hearing, yeah. Attentively. With understanding. How about with all your heart, right? Like all that focus should go towards God, right? So whenever I go through and I read that and I see that, Hear, O Israel, it's like pay attention. Listen to this with all your heart. Put all that focus on God. And what's he saying there? The Lord our God is what? The Lord our God is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. So that kind of goes into what I was talking about. Hear, O Israel, like put that total focus on the fact that the Lord our God is one. So we move on to the next portion of our study, and it's kind of termed No Other Gods. So how important is it only to recognize the one true God? It's very important, right? It's the most important thing, right? As we go through our study tonight, we're going to talk about, we're going to be in Exodus a lot, I will tell you that. And we're going to talk about how the Israelites, how they were exposed to these multiple gods. And then we're going to talk a little bit about their deliverance and things like that. Do anybody have any idea about how long that period was from the time they were in Egypt till the time they were brought or delivered out of Egypt? Has anybody ever looked at that? Yeah, like I always come up with like 430 years. It kind of seems like what I've found and things like that. So generationally, you're looking at multiple generations passing away and being subject to what the times were in Egypt. So what was going on in Egypt in those things? What did they have going on some of those, like when it comes to their deities and stuff? Did they worship the one true God? No, right? So they had like a lot of different gods, did they not? So like, anybody take a guess about how many different gods they had? Hundreds? Any others? It's like thousands. It's like I couldn't go through and I couldn't name them all or anything else like that, but because it's not a study of that. But it was like thousands, and so they had like these physical images that they would make. So here you've got, and then a lot of those gods, each one of those gods had a different function. You know, some of them might have like multiple functions within, but a lot of those gods had different functions. But what's our God have? The one true God. He covers everything. Yeah, he covers everything, right? So are those other gods, are they real? I'm like skipping all around my lesson here, but are those they're not real at all, right? They're fake. Absolutely, they're fake. So how do we reflect that we recognize the one true God, like in our day-to-day lives? Yeah, we base that on the gospel, absolutely. I think this is probably what you said. I wanted to share. I couldn't quite hear you, but yeah, we base that on the gospel. We not only that, we reflect it in how we live, do we not? Right. So when we kind of talked about over the past few classes about how our lives are supposed to reflect whose life? Yeah, God or Jesus. Absolutely, that's exactly right. So we reflect. That's one of the ways that we reflect. So if you want. I can't really make this a study about the book of Exodus, but I highly recommend that you go back and you read, if you want to read a lot of the history that goes along with this class, because it would take a long time. So does anybody want to take a guess as far as what Exodus means? Exit, okay, that's pretty good. Yeah. What else? Anybody ever heard about what Exodus? So when you say there's an Exodus, I'm sorry? Leave, yeah, leave. Exit was said. Like in this particular case, like when it comes to the Israelites, it was like a mass exodus, right? It was like a mass departure, right, with this large number of people. So what has a tendency, okay, so I covered that. They had a God for, the Egyptians had a God for a lot of different things, but we only have a need for a God that is the one God. All right, so Exodus 20. Let's turn there. Yes, Richard.
When we think about like the Exodus and the plagues, God stated one of his purposes was to show his power over the gods of Egypt. Because with those plagues, they were related to what God would do.
Yep. We're going to get there. One of the other comments I have towards that too, Richard, is it was not only to show the Egyptians or the Pharaoh God's power, but it was also to show the God's people, absolutely. The God's people, absolutely. That's right. Exodus 20. I'll go ahead and read, starting in verse 1. Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make, this is verse 4, you shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Verse 9, 6 days you shall labor and do all the work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. So during the captivity, the time in Egypt with the Israelites, they had kind of lost their way. So whenever, we kind of already talked about it, but when there's 430 years in amongst these idol-worshiping peoples, there was generations that turned over. And inside those generations, they had kind of started taking on the worship of a lot of these idols. So if you turn to Joshua 24. Joshua 24. So in verse 14 of Joshua 24, it says, Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and truth, and do away with the gods which your fathers served beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And in Ezekiel 28, But they rebelled against me and were not willing to listen to me. They did not throw away each of them the detestable things of their eyes, nor did they abandon the idols of Egypt. Then I resolved to pour out my wrath on them, to use up my anger against them in the midst of the land of Egypt. So, and then even Moses, if you look at Exodus 3, so without going into a lot of detail, who was Moses raised by? Like Pharaoh's daughter, right? The house of Pharaoh, Pharaoh's daughter, right? So he learned a lot of the ways of the Egyptians and things like that for about 40 years, I believe. For about 40 years. And then, of course, he had the clash with, the Egyptian, and then he went off into the desert and stayed there for about 40 years. And during that time, God was getting him ready to come back and lead the Israelites out of this Egyptian bondage. It's interesting if you go back and you read in Exodus that how the progression of things happened with the Israelites. So they didn't start out like in bondage and things like that, but as time went by, then they ultimately ended up in this bondage. And so God's going to go ahead and he's going to raise up Moses to help take them out of Egypt. So in Exodus 3, let me turn there, verse 1. Now Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock into the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of the bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters. For I am aware of their sufferings, so I have come down to deliver them from the power of the Egyptians, and to bring them from that land to a good, spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanite, the Hittite, and the Amorite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite. Now behold, the cry of the sons of Israel has come to me. Furthermore, I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians are oppressing them. Therefore come now, and I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? And he said, Certainly it will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. Then Moses said to God, Behold, I am going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, The God of your fathers has sent to me. Now they may say to me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God furthermore said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial name to all generations. So Moses, he inquired of God who he was and what he should say, and tell them who they are. He also presented, God also told Moses what his plan was for him. So whenever Moses goes there and into Egypt, what is his mission? To bring the people out, right? And who's going to be with him? Yep, God, right? Yeah, God's going to do that. Absolutely. So here you've got a people who have been in subjectivity for a long time, who have, and these are the Israelites, who have taken on worshiping a lot of these idols and things like that. This will be important to remember for later on. And then even Moses is talking to God, and he's saying, whom should I say who sent me? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. So tell him that I am had sent him. So if you turn to Exodus chapter 8 and verse 19. We're starting to get into the plagues and things like that. Yeah. Exodus 8, verse 19. So we'll back up to verse 18. The magicians of the Pharaoh tried with their secret arts to perform or to bring forth gnats, but they could not. So there were gnats on a man and beast. Then the magician said to the Pharaoh, This is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not listen to them as the Lord had said. So and it's kind of like what Richard said earlier. Whenever these things are going on, these are not only a demonstration of the one true God to Pharaoh over all these other gods and all these priests, It was, and something else about that is with these gods, normally the priest had to tell them what the gods were saying. But yet God was speaking directly to Moses. So I found that to be interesting. In Exodus 9:13. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Rise up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh and say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, God of the Hebrews, let my people go, that they may serve me.'" Verse 14, "For this time I will send all my plagues on you and your servants and your people, so that you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. For if by now I had put forth my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, you would then have been cut off from the earth. But indeed, for this reason I have allowed you to remain in order to show you my power, and in order to proclaim my name through all the earth. Still you exalt yourself against my people by not letting them go." As what Richard said earlier, these demonstrations proved of God's existence. And I think we talked a little bit about it, but has anybody ever looked up like the Hebrew word Yahweh and what it means? It means Lord, yeah. There's something else too, though. I think it means something along the lines of the eternal one. So, or the everlasting one. So, and I think it's a good substitute there. It shows the everlasting one. The power was also for Israel's faith, that they showed that God showed that He could outdo or was much bigger or was the God, and that all the rest of these were false. But let me ask you something. Even after all these things that God did, all these plagues, and I think there were over 40. I think somewhere between 40 and maybe 70, somewhere around in there. After all these things that happened, did Israel then respond in faith and stay faithful? No. So, one of the things about the book of Exodus, it's very reflective to me about our Christian lives today. So the Bible seems like it's cyclical when it comes to when you look at, they were in a lost state, they were brought out, they were put in a relationship with God, and then it seemed like to me there was always this turning back to something that they knew. Interestingly enough, what's one of the things that, after that Moses took them to the mountain, what's one of the things that they wanted to do when that Moses didn't show up right away? What did they want to turn back to? To an idol, right? To an idol. See, idols are physical. Idols are physical things that they could see and that they could touch. Now, the interesting thing about it is how much power does an idol have? It has none. Idols are dead. I mean, they're lifeless. They bring absolutely nothing to the table. Idols don't respond. So, but we have a living God, and our God responds. Our God is ever present. He is like we talked about earlier, He's the fountain from which all things flow. So whenever you have the Israelite people, they seem to be still wanting to go back to where they were at before. So Israel failed the test time and time again. They'd seen these plagues. They'd crossed the Red Sea. They had ate manna and quail, drank water from a rock. They even saw, like if you turn to Exodus chapter 19 and verse 16, they even saw, the existence of God's power. God actually came down to the mountain. So Exodus 19 verse 16. So it came about on the third day, when it was morning, that there were thunder and lightning flashes and a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet sound, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, that they stood at the foot of the mountain. Verse 18, now Mount Sinai was all in smoke because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the entire mountain quaked violently. When the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him with thunder. You know, it's one thing to know of God's existence and things like that, but to have that presence right there, they hadn't seen anything like this from their God, from these Egyptian gods. So they were obviously, I guess you would say, this says the camp trembled. Any comments up to that point? So like I said, this is all going back to no other gods. This is how we're getting there. So what do the first 4 commandments have to do with of the 10? So in Exodus 20, 1 through 3, what is that? No other gods? Yep. No other gods before him. What's the second one? No idols. Absolutely. What's the next one? Don't misuse it. Absolutely. Don't use the name of the Lord in vain. And then what's the next one? Yeah. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. What do all those have to do with? Those 4 right there. Worship. Absolutely. They have to do with worship. But like I said, if you turn to Exodus chapter 32, Exodus chapter 32, 1 through 4. We talked about a little bit about this earlier. Now when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled about Aaron and said to him, come, make us a god who will go before us. For this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. Aaron said to them, tear off the gold rings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. Then all the people tore off the gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took this from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made it into a molten calf. And they said, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. What are they giving these idols? What are they giving them credit for? Yeah, they're giving them credit for what God has done, right? You know, like I said, I don't get that, but they're giving the yes.
They don't even recognize God because in the first verse it says, this Moses, the man who brought us up. They didn't say God brought him up.
Right.
They said the man brought him up.
Yep.
God.
Yep, and Moses had already told him about why he was there, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, Rick said they don't recognize Moses as being from God. They're not even recognizing God at all. They wanted, what they want? What do they want to do with this? They wanted the calf actually to be God. They wanted something visible and physical. So, I mean, they're still in this old mindset of what they've been enduring during their subjectivity in Egypt. But what's the problem with idols? What's one of the problems with idols? They have no power. They're not. Yeah, they don't last very long.
The other thing about an idol, it's man's creation.
It is man's creation. That's exactly right. And what is, so when you create an idol and it's man's creation, what does that go along with? Like if I'm going to, I wouldn't do this, right? But if you were going to create an idol, wouldn't you make that idol allow you to do what you want to do? Yeah, yeah. Yes, it's a very self-serving thing. Absolutely. So that's one of the problems with idols. Another thing is well, let's turn to Romans chapter 1. Let's do a little New Testament application here. Romans chapter 1, verse 20. Isn't there like a verse in the Bible that says you can't serve what? God and mammon, right? Yep. God and mammon, absolutely. Okay. I'm sorry, Romans chapter 1, verse 20. I really like this part. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, and of birds, and of four-footed animals, and crawling creatures. Therefore God gave them over in their lusts of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So there's an inherent danger in this idol worship. There's an inherent danger in not putting God first. There's no other gods beside God, and that's kind of what the Israelites were running into. We talked about how, and we don't need to go there, but in Jeremiah chapter 10, verses 2 through 5, how the idols are actually the creation of man's hands, and they're created from man's imagination and things like that. So who do you think is the driving force behind these idols and all those things like that? The devil, right? Satan and his demons. So let's turn to Matthew chapter 4. Verses 9 through 10. Matthew chapter 4, verses 9 through 10. I'll start at 8. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him, this is speaking of Jesus, all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these things I will give you if you fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Satan is behind that. Satan wanted Jesus to fall down and worship him. And what did Jesus tell him? He said, who are we supposed to worship? Yeah, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Then the nice part about it is that then the devil left him, and behold, the angels, and began to minister to him. So when you go back and you look at idolatry, what did it lead to mostly? Corruption. Absolutely, corruption. It led to moral wickedness. We may think worshiping idols is only a reflection of ignorance and superstition of an earlier time or primitive people. But is that the case today? We still worship idols. You know, if you go back and you take a look at I don't know, I'm not going to pick on any particular thing, but when it comes to, basically when it comes to placing something or replacing God or putting something in front of God, then that becomes what you worship.
If you have a lucky piece and you say, I can't play this game without this sock, you know?
Yeah.
That's worshiping an idol.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of putting God in front of it.
Yeah. Now, we talked a little bit last week about how if we don't keep God in that top of mind presence or position, if we don't put him first, then we're going to be subject to spiritual problems down the road. So if you turn to, flip over to chapter 5, Matthew chapter 5 and verse 24. Go back up to 23. So Matthew chapter 5, verse 23. Therefore, if you are presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come present your offering. Material things and greed are idolatry too. So we're definitely not to put the material things above. So like if you look at the 10 Commandments, and the first 4 commandments have to do with worship, what do the other commandments have to do with? Yeah, okay, yeah, so about the neighbor, so it has to do with our interactions with one another, right? So you go through and you look at all those things. Idols were worshipped in plural. Modern man's trust and belief and confidence and adherence to all these different sciences and things like that, these theories that happen out there, we do that today. Or man does that today, do they not? They talk about, the different theories and everything that go on. But, the Bible doesn't leave any room for any other God but the one true God. So, the Exodus is so central to the understanding of who God is and of who God's people are. But it's also it's hugely important to the way in which the New Testament writers tell the story of what Jesus has done for us. It's the central way and how Jesus actually saves. Even to this day, when we take the Lord's Supper, we baptize a person, preach, do things like that. When we communicate through the Lord's Supper and it echoes this communion, it's much like bringing us out of bondage. We experience a freedom unlike people who have ever had. We're outside of the bonds of sin. We're outside of the physical realm. We live on the hope that's for us eternally. And that's what, if you go back and you look at it and you read Exodus, what was bringing them out was the hope of God bringing them into this land of milk and honey, bringing them out of this bondage and things like that. So whenever we go through and we place our value on something, let's place it on something that is eternal. Let's place it on something that's everlasting. Let's place it to the one place where it belongs. Let's place it to the one who can take the load off of us. Let's place it where we always think of God first in all of our actions. It's amazing if we do those things that we won't have near the amount of trouble and strife than if we don't. So that's all I have for tonight. Is there any other comments or questions? Yes?
sheet we're looking for was Matthew 6:24,
Okay.
about serving two masters.
Right, yeah. Absolutely. Janet said Matthew 6:24 is about the serving the two masters. Absolutely. All right, thank you so much.